Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our look at the Disney Lorcana Comprehensive Rules. Today, we'll be taking a look at sections 8 and 9. Section 8 will be talking about zones. This is where we place things on the table. We talked a little bit about how, there is a little bit of flexibility in where zones are, such as where decks go, where inkwells go, but these are some more definitive rules. Let's go ahead and take a look at it all. Section 8.1 talks about just the general idea of zones. 8.1.1 states, all zones are considered separate from one another. Some zones may be physically present within the same space, but are separate zones for gameplay purposes. It'll talk about, the table is technically the game area. However, each of these things, even though they exist within the table, are considered separate zones. And they're considered separate areas. So it's important for us to make sure that we are keeping those areas distinct. Cards in a public zone are publicly known. Players can look at or count the cards in any public zone at any time. For instance, the play area is a public zone. We're able to know what cards are here. We're able to know what they do. You can ask your opponent, hey, can I read this card? Or can I read this card? Or what does this card do? Same with the discard pile. At any point, you could ask your opponent what cards are in your discard. You can look at your discard. You can read things in your discard. But there are some zones that are private. 8.1.3 states, cards in the private zone aren't publicly known. Players can't look at them unless directed by a game rule or an effect. Players can count the number of cards in the private zone at any time. While a private zone is revealed, it's not considered private. Let's take a look at that. Let's say we play the card Jafar Lamp Thief. Jafar Lamp Thief effect states, when you play this card, look at the top 2 cards of your deck. Put one on the top of your deck and the other on the bottom. So we have these 2 cards. We now have picked them up. We've placed them. We put one on top, one on the bottom. Because a card effect allows us to look at those cards, we are able to look through them and see, what is there. We have picked up the top 2 and made that effect possible. Let's take a look at another card. This card here is Merlin Intellectual Visionary. This states, when you play this character, if you use Shift to play him, you may search your deck for any card, put that card into your hand, then shuffle your deck. I do not own this card. However, I've got a Merlin Rabbit here. If I pay 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to Shift, I am able to look in the private zone of my deck. Note that I'm the only one allowed to look in the private zone, so I'll take a look. Let's grab Lady Tremaine. I don't reveal it unless it says reveal. That's just me kind of demonstrating that I'm choosing the card, but your opponent would not see what you drew, unless it states that you do that. Shuffle your deck, and Tremaine goes to my hand. If an effect allows a player to look at one of their private zones for a specific card, or a card of a specific type, they may fail to find that card. What does fail to find mean? Let's take a look at this. I've changed our playmat a little bit to show off one of my favorite cards, Alma Madrigal. When you play this character, you may search your deck for a magical character card and reveal that card to all players. Shuffle your deck and put that card on top of it. What 8.1.4 states is that if I'm allowed to look in a private zone for a specific card or a card of a specific type, I may fail to find that card. So let's say I look in here. Uh-oh. There are no magical cards. I'm allowed to say, okay, I failed to find, and I will continue with the effect as normal. Similar to how with action cards, if we can't find a specific target, they still will resolve as much as they can. It's important to note, this is a fun ruling that has come around, in that it does not necessarily need to be verified that a legal target is there. So let's say, for instance, that I decide, let's hope there he is. Let's say that I have Bruno Madrigal in here. I have Bruno Madrigal in here, which he's just a magical card. That's the important thing with him. Even if I play Alma, even if I look through, and he is there, I can say, okay, no valid targets. Shuffle my deck. Nothing is placed on top because there's nothing to place on top, and games continue. This is because the deck is still a private zone. So the game and the opponent does not have any way of knowing that a target is there. Even if we have ways of knowing that a card is there, because it is private at the time, only the person who is publicly looking at it is able to verify. So even if you have something where a card, like let's say you play my good friend Yzma. Let's pull up Yzma and check that out. Yzma states, when you play this character, shuffle another chosen character card into their player's deck. They draw 2 cards. So let's say that I had Bruno on the field. I play Yzma. Bruno goes back in the deck. We shuffle, we draw 2, very cool. Next turn, I play Alma. The deck is still private even if we are privy to information that was public. So I can look through the deck, even if my opponent sees, oh, he's got that Bruno, I can say, nope, failed to find. It's a very interesting mechanic, something that some people have been a little less than excited about, but it is important to remember that when we look at these areas, publicity, privacy, we look at what the game knows. Because the game only knows what it knows, does not retain information in the way that we might. 8.1.5 states, if a card enters a private zone from play, any information on or connection to the original card is removed. All effects, damage, and other characteristics are removed, and that card becomes a new card. So if we were to say that Yzma has, let's say not that much, let's say she has 2 damage on her. And we'll say, okay, we're going to play Madam Mim Fox, which Madam Mim Fox, let's go ahead and pull her up, states, when you play this character, banish her or return another chosen character of yours to your hand. So we don't want to banish Mim, so we'll take back Yzma. I can then replay Yzma, and she is a brand new card. She doesn't have the damage put back on her. She isn't considered the old card coming back. It becomes a new card because it entered a private zone. We have no way of verifying if maybe I have 2 copies of Yzma and I played a different one, or what it is, where it came from. It always is a new card. Let's take a look at the deck. 8.2.1 states, a player's deck is where cards they may use in a particular game are held. The deck is a private zone. The cards in a player's deck remain face down at all times in a single pile. Players can't look at or change the order of cards in their decks during a game. Players can count the remaining cards in any player's deck at any time. So I'm always able to ask my opponent, hey, how many cards are in your deck? And I go, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. 19 cards. But they're not able to, look at the deck, check out the order of anything. They are just there. 8.2.3 states, whenever a card or game state instructs a player to draw a card, follow the rules outlined in draw, which means it's the very specific act of taking one card and drawing it into your hand. If cards are added to the top or bottom of a deck in any order, and the cards were publicly known to all players, the order in which the cards are added to the deck must be known by all players. A card like Jafar Lamp Thief does not say reveal. We took the 2 cards, we place one at the top and the bottom. That is all within a private zone. But if we said, okay, let's take a card from the game and put it on the bottom of the deck, if it's revealed and it's publicly known to all players, they are able to ask the order of those cards. Let's look at the hand. 8.3 is the hand. A player's hand is where drawn cards are held. Cards can be added to the hand by other effects as well. Players start the game with a hand of drawn cards. The hand is a private zone. Players can look at the cards in their own hand, but can't look at the cards in another player's hand at any time. Players can count the number of cards in hand at any time. Players can hold and rearrange their hands in any comfortable and or convenient fashion. So let's start the game. We'll go ahead. The deck is going to be a little small, but that's okay. We're going to go ahead and draw 7. Now, I have 7 cards in my hand right now. I can order them in any way that I want. I can shuffle them. I can organize them. Like, oh, let's put... Okay, great. We're going to have this one here, and this is going to be our ink and whatnot. We're able to adjust it in any sort of way. But I can't look at my opponent's hand. They can't look at my hand. And it's always important to make sure the hand is in a convenient spot so that it doesn't get mixed up with our ink or anything on the playfield. There is no maximum hand size. A hand can't have fewer than 0 cards in it. I can draw as much as I want. I can draw my entire deck if I so choose to and do nothing with it. There is no maximum hand size. If an effect instructs someone to discard, that player chooses the indicated number of cards from their hand and puts them into the discard pile. So if I were to play something like Set and Chill, which each opponent chooses and discards a card, my opponent would look at their hand, choose one of their cards, and put them in the discard pile. Let's look at the play area. A player's play zone is where their characters, items, and locations are played. Only characters, items, and locations can be in the play zone. Players cannot play cards into an opponent's play zone. And generally the play zone is going to be this area right up top where things happen. So I place my items, I place my characters, and I place my locations. There it goes. I place my locations. All of these are within the play area and can be interacted with. The discard pile, the deck, the inkwell, anything like that is not part of the play area. Only the cards in a player's play zone are considered in play. Cards outside the game aren't in play. Cards in the bag and those in a player's deck, discard, hand, and inkwell aren't in play. The play zone is a public zone. Players can look at the cards any player has in play at any time. Players can count the number of cards any player has in play at any time. Whenever one or more cards would leave play, they first check whether any abilities would trigger from them or others leaving play. Let's take a look at this. Here we have Baloo. Baloo is a bodyguard, and he has the ability, when this character is banished, gain 2 lore. So we're in our game. Let's put Baloo here. Uh-oh. Baloo has taken, let's say Yzma challenges Baloo. Go down so we can see it. Yzma has challenged Baloo. They're both exerted. Baloo takes 4 damage counters. He banishes. We check, okay, what's going to happen when he's banished? Well, the controlling player will gain 2 lore. So I up my lore by 2 and play continues as normal. Let's keep scrolling down. We're going to learn next about the inkwell. A player's inkwell is where they put the cards they will use as ink throughout the game. These cards are ink cards. Each ink card must have the inkwell symbol around its cost and represent one the player can use to pay ink costs. Nothing on the front of an ink card affects the ink it generates. There is no limit to the number of cards a player can have in their inkwell. So what this means, you see Blue right up here, he does not have the inkwell symbol. So I cannot naturally say, okay, I'm going to place Blue in my inkwell. We talked about that a little bit in the play actions. We talked a little bit about that and things we can do during our turn. But it's important to remember that only cards with this inkwell symbol are valid targets to be placed in the inkwell. Like Sudden Chill can be placed in the inkwell because they have the inkwell symbol. And nothing about ink. Once a card enters here, it becomes ink. We don't know what's in here. We don't know what cards are there. And they don't value anything differently. They all just represent one ink, no matter what card they are. Cards enter the inkwell face down and ready. If multiple cards enter the inkwell at the same time, each card is treated as a separate instance. The inkwell is a private zone. Players can't look at a card in an inkwell at any time, even their own. Players can count the number of cards in any inkwell at any time. Players can arrange the cards in their inkwell in any comfortable and convenient fashion, provided that ink cards are kept face down and separate from cards in all other zones at all times. The number of cards in the inkwell and the number of them that are ready can't be hidden from other players. So you're able to do whatever you like. You're able to, some people will put their ink like this. They'll be like, okay, here's what I want to do. This is my big game plan. Others will have them in a stack like this and then just distribute them as play happens. Some people will have them laid out just one by one and just kind of push them over. Any style works as long as those two things are held, that we're able to know, whether it's by asking or by showing, how many cards are in the inkwell, as well as knowing what has been exerted or not. So if I spent 2 to play Sudden Chill, my opponent should know that I've spent 2 ink. And they should know that I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 left. If a card allows a player to put an additional card into the inkwell on their turn, they'll announce they're using that effect, then follow the normal steps of putting a card into the inkwell. If a card allows a player to put an additional card into their inkwell on their turn, they announce they're using that effect, and then follow the normal steps of putting a card into their inkwell. This can be done a few different ways. This card here is Tipo. When you play this character, you may put a card from your hand into your inkwell face down and exerted. So the way I would play that, I would say, I'm going to play Tipo. I'm going to spend 2 ink to play Tipo. I will use Tipo's effect to place a card from my hand, which I'll use the red cards for. I'll go ahead and place that into the inkwell. Note that because this card states that you may put a card from your hand, it does not necessarily have to have the inkwell symbol, because it is putting a card off of the effect rather than granting you an additional ink as a turn action. Of course, there are other cards that have these abilities as well that aren't based off of triggers. Bell, Strange but Special, which I also don't own, so we'll use Tipo again, states, during your turn, you may put an additional card from your hand into your inkwell face down. So we go ahead, we do our normal ink. Let's say, okay, I'm going to ink Merlin. Then I'll say, I'm going to use Bell's Strange but Special effect to put another card from my hand into my inkwell face down. Because it does not say you get an extra turn action, but rather that you just put the hand into the inkwell face down, I'm allowed to put non-inkable cards in there as well. So I'll go ahead and put Merlin Rabbit in my inkwell. We can see we've done our turn action as well as the effect of Bell. Let's go ahead and take a look at our next zone. Of course, before we do that, I got to make sure I catch our last zone right here. 8.5.6. Whenever an effect puts a card from another zone into the inkwell, the card isn't revealed and isn't required to have the inkwell symbol. It enters the ink face down as ink. So a card like Mickey Mouse that says, when you play this character, you may put the top card of your deck into your inkwell face down and exerted. Similar to how Tipo and how Bell worked, because it is going from another zone to our inkwell, it doesn't have to be revealed. However, unlike the cards where you look from your hand and you can choose what goes in there, you can go, okay, well I know that Dalmatian Puppy is going to go in my inkwell. For effects like Mickey Mouse, you do not get to look. So you don't get to go, okay, Madam Mim's going in the inkwell. You simply place the card face down and exerted. If a card effect tells you to look, then, follow the card effect. As we looked in the first chapter, card effects will always supersede gameplay rules. However, if it does not say to look, you just place point A to point B. Let's take a look at our next section next. 8.6 is the discard pile. A player's discard pile is where their characters that have left play are held. Cards that are banished and action cards that are finished resolving are put into their player's discard pile. The discard is a public zone. The cards in a player's discard remain face up at all times and in a single pile. Players can look at and count the cards in any player's discard pile at any time. A player can look at and rearrange the cards in their own discard pile at any time. This comes up, it actually came up when I was judging. This discussion came up as to what are people allowed to organize in their discard pile. For instance, let's take one of the biggest cards currently being played in the meta. Give us 1 second to get there. Here is Tamatoa, which I also don't own. It states, when you play this character, and whenever he quests, you may return an item card from your discard to your hand. Very powerful effect. Of course, we want to track if we're able to actually pull off this effect. So what we'll do first is we'll go ahead and fill us up with some items. There we go. Let's get another one in there. We'll do one more if I have it. If not, I won't. Okay, I don't have it. But that should be sufficient for us. So let's say over the course of gameplay, we have about 4 items that are that we've used. We'll use Mickey Mouse to be Tamatoa. We'll say, okay, I'm going to spend 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I'm going to play Tamatoa. All right, I'll go ahead and use Tamatoa's effect. Some people, rather than just looking through a discard pile, they may want to have their items in a separate pile. So that way they know, okay, these are the items that I have. This is how I know, okay, I need to put like this over here and this over here. Unfortunately, because of this rule, we are not able to do that. But you are allowed to maybe place all the items on top, even if something else gets banished. You can rearrange to go, okay, I want my items on top, so I know that when I play Tamatoa, I'll grab this one and put it back to my hand. If multiple cards enter a discard pile at the same time, the player adds them in any order. Kind of an extension of 8.6.3. Cards that enter and leave can go in any order. If we have banished the whole field, we don't have to put them in a specific order, and we can rearrange them anytime we like. Now, I've talked a lot about tangible zones, but 8.7 talks about a little more of an intangible zone. The bag. Unlike other zones, the bag isn't a physical space, but is only where triggered abilities created by the game wait to resolve. Only triggered abilities can be added to the bag. Activated abilities, resolving actions, and playing characters, locations, or items aren't added to the bag. Whenever a triggered ability's condition is met, the ability is added to the bag by the player who played the card with the triggered ability. If multiple triggered abilities happen at the same time, they're added to the bag simultaneously by the respective players. Let's go ahead and set up a situation. Here's my board. We have Baloo and 2 Merlin rabbits. My opponent has just played Sisu Empowered Sibling, which states when you play this character, banish all opposing characters with 2 strength or less. Merlin Rabbit has 2 strength. We'll look at that here. Fantastic. There is Merlin Rabbit with 2 strength, and here is Baloo with, unfortunately, 0 strength. So all 3 will enter the discard pile at the same time. Then, if they have any effects that resolve, the active player would resolve that first. So Sisu has been on there. We've banished the characters. There are no more effects that go off. Now, because I am the opponent, we will resolve them one at a time. We'll go into 7.5. If there are any abilities from multiple players in the bag, the active player resolves all of their abilities first, one at a time, including any that were added as a result of resolving abilities. The next player resolves all of their abilities following the guidelines in 8.7.5. If this causes new triggers, regardless of whose ability is triggered, the current resolving player keeps resolving triggers. So we would go in that turn order. So my opponent has finished all of their triggers, and now all 3 of mine that have entered the bag will go off next. We'll go ahead and look at our next page, 8.7.7. Continue around the table until there are no more triggers left to resolve. So, okay, I got my 3 triggers. We'll resolve Baloo first, so I'm going to gain 2 lore. Resolve Rabbit, I'll draw. We'll resolve Rabbit, I'll draw. Then I'm done. If there were a 3rd player, they would then go and resolve their triggers until everything is completed. Once the bag is empty and all players have no more abilities to resolve or turn actions to take, the players proceed to the next step or phase of the game. So now that I've resolved everything, my opponent, who's the active player, is going to keep doing what they are doing. If a player leaves the game while abilities are still waiting in the bag to resolve, those abilities cease to exist. So if for some reason, let's say that I have no cards in deck, I choose to activate Merlin Rabbit for some reason, I attempt to draw, I have lost the game, and I still have Baloo that is trying to resolve, Baloo's effect doesn't happen. It doesn't sort of save me in any situation. Once the action has resolved, the game state check happens and states that I have lost. And that's all for our zones. These are all the zones we play with, and these are all the areas where cards are placed. Of course, we have time to look at Chapter 9, which is a very small chapter, but talks about damage counters. 9.1 talks about damage counters as a representation of damage. Damage on a character is represented by damage counters. Each damage counter represents 1 damage. Any damage counter to represent more than 1 damage counts as a separate damage counter for each 1 damage it represents. So if we have Merlin Rabbit on board, and Merlin Rabbit has taken 2 damage, we have 2 damage counters. Even though this dice represents 2 damage counters, it is not representing a 2 damage counter. It is a representation of 2 1 damage counters. Let's talk about putting. If an effect puts a damage counter onto a character or location, that doesn't count as dealing damage to that character or location and isn't affected by modifications to damage that is dealt. Let's look at that in practice. Wording in Lorcana is so important because this talks about the difference between dealing damage or putting damage. So in this scenario, we have our Mickey Mouse my opponent's Mickey Mouse detective, who is currently going to challenge our wonderful friend Merlin Rabbit. But we have another character on board, Beast Selfless Protector. We enter the challenge Mickey Mouse exerts. I declare that I'm challenging Merlin Rabbit. We enter the challenge. Beast effect states, whenever one of your other characters will be dealt damage, put that many damage counters on this character instead. Now on the board, I have Cogsworth, who says your other characters get resist +1. Fantastic. Now, in this case, well, Mickey Mouse, when he challenges, should deal 0 damage to Merlin Rabbit. However, because Beast Selfless Protector is there, he is able to take the damage instead. Now, because dealing damage happens before modifications like Cogsworth, which are replacement effects, Beast would take 1 damage counter. And because it is putting damage and not dealing damage, Cogsworth replacement ability, or if I'll go the right direction, Cogsworth replacement ability does not happen, because this only reduces damage dealt to them, not damage put on them. Of course, we can also move damage counters. Moving damage counters has the effect of removing a specified number of counters from a chosen character and putting the same number of damage counters on a new one. So let's go ahead and check this out. We're going to go ahead and look at this fun card. Or Pokemon. Not that. Hopefully we'll get there. If not, no worries. There are plenty of other ways to find. There we go. Madam Mim Elephant. Let's put a bunch of damage on Madam Mim. Let's put, because Madam Mim can take it. She's got 5 damage counters on her. Let's say Mickey Mouse has 1 damage counter. The second effect that Madam Mim has is, at the start of your turn, you may move up to 2 damage counters from this character to chosen opponent character. So let's say start of my turn, we ready, we set, that's when Madam Mim activates, and we move 2 damage counters, and we say let's put it onto Mickey Mouse. Mickey Mouse now has 3 damage counters. Much like pudding, even if our friend Cogsworth is sitting right here, that does not affect the movement. The game state check happens. Mickey Mouse has 3 damage counters for his 3 willpower. He goes away. Let's take a look a little more. 9.4 talks about leaving play. When a card with damage leaves play, when game states are checked, all damage counters on it cease to exist. So, once Mickey Mouse left, he is not Mickey Mouse with 3 damage counters on him sitting in the discard pile that we track. He is just the Mickey Mouse card. All damage counters go away. They are not recorded. They are not tracked. Doesn't matter how much are on there. They are just gone. We are almost here at the very end of this magical adventure. We have learned a lot. I have learned a lot, which you will definitely be seeing as I do re-edits of this thing. But how amazing it is to understand so many different rules. Understanding how things happen and being able to look at all of these will allow us to have a better chance of managing our own games, making sure that we are understanding how things happen. And when we understand how things happen, we know how to utilize that to our best ability to make sure that we are making the best possible moves, to make sure we're reducing misplays, and most importantly, having fun. We're going to go with our next section, Chapter 10, Keywords, in the next video. But thanks so much for supporting, and I'll see y'all next time.